All right. Hello, everybody. We will get started in just a moment at the top of the hour. Just want to get logged in, get everything situated so that we were ready to go and be cognizant of your time. So we are so excited to be hosting the Summer Curriculum Planning Series today. My name is Jenna DeFazio. I'm one of the Customer Success Managers for Embarc, and I'm joined with the rest of my team, Al Krause and Lisa Tunnell. And then we are really excited to have our client guest with us today, Dr. Amy Mount, who is the Director of Curriculum and Instruction at Gateway Regional School District, which is in New Jersey. So we'll go ahead and get started. Today's session is on curriculum mapping and alignment. And just to give you a preview of what we'll talk about, we'll kind of discuss a guiding question, talk about some best practices, and then we'll open it up so that you all have the opportunity to kind of participate in the conversation, ask some questions, share any insight that you'd like to, and really just have a good curriculum discussion here in the summer. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just have our guiding question in the background, which is how can you ensure vertical alignment with standards and monitor the level to which they're taught? And as I mentioned, we're very lucky to be joined by Dr. Amy Mount, who's done tons of curriculum work and is going to share some insight with you all.
Thanks, Jenna. So I think the vertical alignment is one of the most interesting and most challenging parts of curriculum alignment, of curriculum development, regardless of what school level you're at, or what district level you're at. I mean, vertical alignment is the forest and the trees, right? So if we think about planning curriculum and planning instruction, vertical alignment is really that forest piece. So whereas the teachers are worrying about their own individual content, and if you're a building principal or a building supervisor, thinking about making sure that you're hitting the standards for that, really looking at vertical alignment, it's the health of the entire system. And so if we're thinking about it as the forest instead of the trees, it's not just because we don't want a monoculture of just one type of tree in a forest to have a healthy forest. We want a variety of different kinds of trees. And so if we're thinking about vertical alignment, it's the variety of different pieces that build a really guaranteed viable curriculum. So not just the standards for the individual courses, but also the skills, the concepts, those big pieces that tie everything together. So helping teachers, helping instructional supervisors, instructional coaches really think about the big picture is the most challenging part about monitoring to the level that they're taught. I mean, that's the first piece, is even understanding what do we mean when we say vertical alignment, and that's how all of these different pieces fit together. My favorite example from really looking at vertical alignment and what it is and why it's important comes from probably the most neglected part of our curriculum, which is elementary social studies. So if we think about the instruction of elementary social studies, it's the perfect example for what vertical alignment is and why vertical alignment is so critical. So if you have a little baby kindergartner, social studies for them is, who am I in my classroom? How do I relate to the other students in my classroom, to my teacher? And because their world is small. And then first and second grade, we expand the focus of their world a little bit. So we start talking about, who am I as a good citizen within my school, within my neighborhood, right around me. By second grade, we're ready, second and third grade, we're really ready to start talking about, who am I as a citizen? What does it mean to be in my community? And so we're expanding that picture a little bit larger. Fourth grade, we're ready to expand my community in comparison to other communities in my community, typically within my state, whether you're in Texas doing Texas history or New Jersey doing New Jersey history. Most fourth grade around the country is some sort of state history. And then by fifth grade, most kids are looking at, who am I as an American? What does it mean in US history? And then sixth grade around the country, it's, who am I in part of the world? And it's so that it's that understanding of going from, who am I as an individual, all the way up to who am I in my community, in my country, and in my world, is the perfect example of that vertical articulation and expanding that all out so that we develop those really good base skills so that by the time we get to middle school and high school in social studies, we can dive back in and look at those same sort of topics at a deeper level. So really talking to your teachers about what does vertical alignment mean, and how does, it's not just the standards that were taught before me and the standards that are taught after me, but what does my content, what is the goal of my content overall K-12? What am I really attempting to do with these kids? What is the instruction? What are these 4 pieces? And how do all those pieces fit together? And that really only comes from years of studying, not just the standards and the individual performance expectations themselves, but those key themes and those overarching concepts within our standards. I think that's the best place to start if you're an instructional leader working with teachers, is picking a theme, a couple of themes, and centering conversations around what does this mean to us in our school? How are we addressing this, and facilitating conversations beginning there.
Excellent. I love that piece that you say that it's more than just those standards that are before me and after me. It's really understanding that content and the goal of the content. And so in doing that, it's easy for us to say, right? So how have you implemented that, in some of the districts where you've worked?
I think that this is a really good place for teachers to have really good conversations. This is a nice place where we can center our conversations on the standards and talk to each other about, okay, let's pick a performance expectation. Let's pick an anchor standard or a major theme. Let's talk about it. If I'm the kindergarten teacher, you're the first grade teacher, you're the second grade teacher, let's talk about what it is. How do we address that? How are we sharing that? What are some things that we're noticing? And those are the same types of conversations. Those guiding questions can be used at all different levels. And it's really interesting when you have a wide band of teachers talking about the same thing. If you had a 3rd grade teacher, a 6th grade teacher, and a 9th grade teacher all talking about the concepts, picking an anchor standard, right? Like looking at plot. How do we talk about plot in 3rd grade versus 6th grade versus 9th grade? You don't even necessarily have to have teachers that are in grade levels adjacent right next to each other, but just being able to have, picking that focus area and having that conversation about what does this mean? How do we explain this to kids? How do we illustrate this to kids? Because you'll find that there's more commonalities than there are differences, and there's really a lot that you can learn. Not just having the older grade levels tell the younger grade levels, well, this is what you should be doing because this is what I need them to do in high school. So you should be doing this, right? We want to avoid those and making sure that the conversation is equitable and lets everybody come into the conversation talking about, here are the things that we can do and we can share, and how can we learn from one another.
Right, really taking that holistic approach as we're a team, right? Getting these students to be ready for that next level. I love that. And then also just that example with social studies is wonderful. How does the challenge kind of change when you're looking at smaller districts versus larger districts, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think it can be. So it's 2 sides of the same coin. The problem in a smaller district is you tend to have one person teaching everything. And so it can be really hard to make sure that, I'm teaching these contents and teaching multiple different grade levels at the same time. So am I covering everything? I think it also depends on the way your state is set up, right? So if you're in Texas and these are the 3rd grade standards and these are the 4th grade standards, these are 5th grade standards, that's one level of challenge because you have to make sure you get those standards taught in the grade levels that they're supposed to be taught. In a state like New Jersey, where I am currently, they're grade bands. So it's by the end of 2nd, by the end of 5th, by the end of 8th. And so making sure who's teaching them and where, and how are we doing that? In a big district, I think the biggest challenge is making sure that it's being taught equitably across the district. You want every school to have their own personality, their own approach, but making sure that they're still fidelity across the district so that the experience of a kid in one neighborhood school isn't completely different from a kid across the district in a different neighborhood school. Obviously, yes, we want teachers to have their own personality, we want schools to have their own personality, but making sure that there's an equitable experience for all of our kids. And that can be one of the challenges in the bigger district, is allowing that instructional freedom, but also making sure that there's an equitable experience for all of the kids. And this is where, as an instructional leader, having a tool where you can really make sure that you have all the standards taught in your curriculum, that you are using the tools in things like Embarc with the reports, of knowing what standards are taught where is the most foundational piece. You can't build a vertical alignment, you can't have those bigger conversations until you know what's being taught where. And if you're doing that in Embarc with the reports, or another system with reports, that's great. If you don't have those and you're having to build all those reports by hand, it can be really, really difficult to really know, what am I doing where and when, and how many times and to what extent.
Yeah, that's great. I definitely was thinking about that, looking back at some of the curriculum revisions that I've led or participated in, just getting it together and putting the hash marks and trying to, kind of keep it all organized, and just not having just a good system for it. So I appreciate you like kind of expanding on that, and kind of moving to that second question, even what are some best practices? So I know you've mentioned like being able to produce reports, but kind of what type of materials do you have your teachers bring together when they're meeting to discuss these types of things?
Right. So I think it starts as an instructional leader in selecting what your focus is going to be. You can't vertically align every piece every year all the time. It's too much. There's too many standards. There's too much focus, right? Less is more. So picking one performance expectation band, one anchor standard, one theme within your standards, and having that be the focus, if not for the year, at least for a couple of months, more than just one meeting, to really focus the conversation. What is it we're working on now? And it's got to be something less than all of the standards, or less than all of the priority standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to pick a really focused perspective. And as an instructional leader, right, that's your job, is to scale the work and focus the work enough for your teachers to be able to do it. So I think that's the first best practice, is really decide your focus area and what you're going to talk about. I think the next best practice when having teachers look at vertical alignment is decide on your focus questions and your conversational questions. What are the things you want teachers to talk about? I think it's always great to say, like, hey, everybody bring to the table, if we're talking about plot, if we're talking about citizenship, if we're talking about these different pieces, everybody bring a practice of your best example of what it is that you're working on that really teaches this well for your grade level, that you think meets your standards at your grade level, that has been effective for your kids. Bring that. And also bring your biggest challenge. Like, what is the one thing? Because we all have, in each standard, there are aspects that we're really strong with and aspects that we could continue to improve. So bring both. Bring something that's a really good example of what you're doing well with your kids, what's worked, and bring a question, bring a concern on what could be better. And start those conversations with having everybody really talk and share about, this is what I'm doing that's really going well. And then focus the question on, and this is what I'm struggling with. Making sure that everybody in the group has an opportunity to share and discuss both pieces, not just what's going well, but what everybody's struggling with, so that there's equitable voice for everybody. And then deciding how you're going to capture all those results, especially if you're in a bigger district and you're working with people across different schools. Taking those conversations and those best practices of what people have brought and putting them in a shared folder so that we can all learn together, making sure that they're in Embarc, making sure that they're in the activities, that they're tagged, available for everybody to see, so that we can all learn from each other and grow and share. And then, having the notes on what are those common challenges that we're struggling with. Those are things that can be lifted up for your instructional coaches or your instructional leadership, that should be paid attention to for future professional development or resource allocation. or different needs for those different pieces.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Amy. You have such a great knowledge on this subject, and something that I'm sure that people are thinking about and would love to hear kind of your perspective on is, we're sick of talking about it, but we can't stop. Like with this situation with COVID and all the gaps and, the learning gaps, and we're trying to fill those in. What's kind of what's your advice on that, or what's kind of your approach that you've taken just to kind of start to tackle that issue?
Right. Well, I think we have a lot of data that's coming out of, I'm sure that each of the different schools or in different districts and states are addressing the data process in a different way. We have all this data coming out. And I hate talking about learning gaps and the lost learning. Kids learned plenty when they were home. It just wasn't necessarily the state standards. It wasn't necessarily, and this idea that they're behind, behind what? These are arbitrary benchmarks that we've imposed upon ourselves, right? So I think acknowledging that, right? Like what needs to be learned by the end of 4th grade is something that we have determined, right? That's not set forth by some higher power. So understanding that we can do that. I think also, really figuring out what is the most important. Not all standards are created equal, and not every one of them is required for success in order to move on. So what are those most important pieces, and what are the pieces that we can spiral up? Most of our standards, it's not like there's ever one standard that I'm going to teach this one time in 3rd grade, and if you don't get it, you're never going to get it taught it in the rest of your life. You got to learn it now, right? How are those pieces spiraling up? Where is the opportunity when in older grades to remediate, to catch things up, to work with your RTI process, to pull those pieces through for special lessons. But I would encourage people to take a breath and not have so much anxiety over, I have 2 little kids at home. My son was a 3rd grader during COVID. He's fine. He's going to be right. The kids are going to be fine. My baby was 2. She's now getting ready to go into kindergarten. She's good. Being stuck home with me for 2 years didn't put her behind. I mean, she learned plenty of vocabulary. Not all of it is school appropriate for being stuck around me all the time, but she's good. Like, it's okay. We'll all get caught up. It'll be fine. Kids, their neuroplasticity in their brain, they'll get caught up to where we need to get caught up. It's more about the adult anxiety and, giving that space and grace to your teachers. Like, it's okay, take a breath. Like, you don't have to teach every standard to the depth that you would do in a normal year. And it's okay if they need to be caught up and adjust things around. But you can't expect that we're going to do, even this year, we're not going to do everything the same way that we did it in 2019 prior to COVID. We're still, and we shouldn't, honestly, we should be taking the lessons that we learned out of the pandemic, out of virtual learning, and applying those and continuing to get better. We should never want to go back to what it was. We gotta find the blessings and the silver linings and pull those forward.
That's great. Yes, I think it's always one of those things, like when you hear it from a respected colleague, you're like, okay, I can give myself that grace, or I can move forward this way. So definitely appreciate your insight on that aspect. Some of the key points we've really talked a lot about. We've hit on the vertical alignment, time, challenges, even the horizontal, by talking about the different campuses within your district and making sure that it's equitable for our students. We looked at that tracking, talked about reports and some resources. So I think we really did we got a lot discussed, but at this point, we'd love for those of you who are participating to be able to get questions answered and spark some discussion from us. So I invite you to use the chat feature and go ahead and shoot us any questions, regarding curriculum. We're happy to answer them. We have about 10 more minutes here. So glad to answer anything that you'd like us to talk about. And we'll employ the wait time. As we kind of wait on some questions, Amy, I'd love to kind of talk to you about how You had mentioned before when you have your activities and getting those activities aligned to, your standards, what's kind of some approach that you've taken on that so that those activities, those learning experiences that are happening in the classroom are aligned to the standards that the state has set forth?
Yeah, so I think this is where, really working with your teachers about depth of knowledge and understanding what is the content, not just the content, but what is the depth of the rigor? What does it actually mean? There's plenty of good content available out there that is on topic, but doesn't necessarily meet the same level of thinking that's required in the standards. So we have to find things that are not just aligned topically to the content, but also are eliciting in the students the depth of the conversation that's required in the standards. And that can be challenging because not all kids are ready to meet the depth that's required by the standards. So having a really good activity that meets that standard, but also having that plan for teachers on what are the available resources for differentiation and for scaffolding for kids who are not quite ready there. And I think a lot of that comes, from, hey, I've got this cool idea that we're doing, and having those conversations in PLCs with your co-teacher or across the district, or like I work with 5 school districts, so we share those ideas across our elementary school districts, even though they're not the same district. We can still have those conversations, and some of our schools have different resources, but it's still the same standard. So we're being able to have that conversation on what's working for kids and what is best meeting those.
Awesome. Amy, there is a question for you in the Q&A, and they would like to know, what softwares did you look at to help with implementing the vertical alignment, and why did you choose Embarc?
Yeah, so I work with 5 small school districts here in Southern New Jersey. So prior to Embarc, I built everything by hand in Google Drive. All of our curriculum documents were shared documents across the 5 different school districts, because we all have a little bit of a different student information system. My elementary schools use OnCourse, my high school uses PowerSchool. So I didn't really have something that I could use. I know there are some pieces in PowerSchool. I know there are some pieces in OnCourse, but I couldn't access them for vertical alignment and for curricular documents, because none of the schools used the same thing. So everything I did, I built by hand with Google Sheets with X marks of where we met the standards. I went with Embarc because, frankly, I couldn't manage all of the Google documents by myself anymore. I do have a team with 4 instructional supervisors who support me, but frankly, with the number of standards and the pace at which New Jersey is revising their standards and requiring revisions of standards in the midst of COVID still going on, it was just not something that I could manage by hand anymore. So we leveraged the silver lining from COVID is some of the grant money. So we leveraged some of our grant money to be able to get up and get moving with Embarc. Because it was something that was agnostic of our devices, agnostic of our student information system, and frankly was really easy for us to get up and moving, that I could customize to exactly, I know exactly what I want my curriculum documents to look like. I know exactly how I want teachers to put things in and what's going to work with using different materials at different campuses. And so we went with Embarc because I could meet all of those goals and still satisfy the budget of my teeny tiny districts. With what little money that I had available, and find a product that was really going to work for me and work for my teachers. Most importantly, it's easy to use. So
excellent. Love hearing that. Any other questions from, out there in the webinar? An answer for you. All right, well, we will kind of move forward. Just to have a slide, a quick, Amy did a great explanation of kind of what Embarc has done for her. And at Education Advanced, we also have some master scheduling software as well as testing software. So we are so glad that you were able to join us today. We want to thank you for joining us today. And if there's any questions at all regarding curriculum mapping, alignment, the Embarc system, anything at all. We really want to be able to support you. We know that everything that's going on now, any support is helpful. So that's what we're here for. And please, shoot us any questions that you have. We're happy to answer them. Even if it's not something that we really touched on today, we're happy to explore that with you. There's some contact information on the screen. And so again, we'd love to, see you again. We have another episode coming up on Tuesday and Thursday of next week, and a lot of different topics. Amy, I just want to tell you, thank you so much. I learned so much, and it's great talking with other, curriculum-minded people, and it's a big job, right? Like everyone out there, the only thing, everyone's not just doing curriculum, right? If you're doing curriculum, you're doing 10, 15, 100 other things. So we want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise and taking your time to be here with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I had a great time. I appreciate being asked.
Wonderful. All right. Well, that will do it for us today. And so we hope to hear from you or see you again in the future. Bye-bye, everyone.